Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first session of these Lightning Lunch series. You may be watching live right now, or you could be watching at a later point. We really hope that you enjoy the following sessions. For those of you who are joining us live, this will be a Zoom webinar. So there is no sound or video, so you can just sit back and relax. We can't hear you and we can't see you either. There is an opportunity to ask questions throughout this talk using the Q&A button, and you can ask this anonymously. If you are watching in the future at a later date, then you can ask any of the questions that you want to either outreach at ljmu.ac.uk or to courses@ljmu.ac.uk. Today's session will be with Michael Richter, a lecturing academic member of staff from psychology, who will be talking to you about a specialist subject. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Michael. Thank you.
Here we go. So what I'd like to do in this lightning lunch session is I'd like to give you a brief introduction to psychological theorizing on stress. In particular, the question why some of us are really able to cope with stress, where they are less affected by stress than others. This is just a glimpse of the content that we deliver on stress on our various programs. So stress is part, for instance, of the first and third year of the BSc psychology program, and stress also plays a major role in our master's programs on health psychology, brain and behavior, or positive psychology. So you will learn much more in detail about stress responses, how to measure it, how to treat it, how to prevent it on the programs. Here, I'm just giving you a really quick and brief introduction to the inter-individual differences regarding the experience of stress. And I'd like to start not by talking about differences between people, but by talking about differences between humans and animals, zebras in particular. So if you think for a moment about a zebra, or pick any other animal basically, when does a zebra feels stress? When does a zebra experiences something that comes close to our stress responses? Probably there is a single occasion when a zebra shows a stress response and experiences stress, and that is when it encounters a predator. When there's a predator, then the zebra shows a stress response, a bodily stress response. So it becomes activated, it becomes alerted, the cardiovascular system of the zebra starts to become activated, heart rate increases, the blood flow to the big leg muscles increases. And this stress response allows the zebra to cope with the threat of the predator. So it then will just basically run away, or if it's a smaller predator, it might try to fight the predator. And this is the single occasion basically when it encounters predators, when a zebra shows a stress response. And now there's already the first comparison that you can make to humans. We rarely experience really life-threatening situations in our daily lives. We are embedded in society with all the security network, we have family, friends who support us. So we rarely are in a situation where our lives are at stake. So we are rarely in this kind of situation that the zebra is. But nevertheless, we experience a lot of stress, probably more than the zebra. So the zebra, how many times a day does it encounter a predator? Well, probably once, twice, maximum. And then how long does this zebra stress response last? It's probably just a couple of minutes. So just for a short amount of time, the zebra has to show a stress response and experiences stress when it needs to basically run away or to fight the predator. And after that, the zebra relaxes and experiences no longer stress. So they are just probably 2, 4, 5 minutes a day where the zebra experiences stress. For most of us, that's not the same. We experience stress much more frequently than the zebra. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is probably that we experience stress not only in relation to life-threatening situations, events. Our brains have generalized this threat-related stress response to more Well, situations that are, at least from an evolutionary point of view, much less threatening. So if we have to do, for instance, a public presentation, and that can be an assessed one in school and at university, but that also can be just delivering a speech at a wedding or a funeral, for instance. These kind of public speaking situations often are, we feel stressed in these situations. Even that is certainly not a life-threatening situation. If we worry about financial issues, if we worry about how other people perceive us, and then we get stressed about that, that is most of the time not a life-threatening situation, but nevertheless, we show the same stress response that the zebra only shows when encountering a predator. So somehow our brain has generalized this stress response that in the zebra is related to really life-threatening situations to many more situations. And for that reason, we basically experience stress much more frequently. And for that reason, there are also individual differences, because the situations to which we, our brains, associate the stress response, they differ between individuals. And that's not a good thing, because the stress response of the zebra is a good one. It's a healthy one, because it allows the zebra to defend itself. The zebras don't have any negative effects. They don't get any of these cardiovascular or gastric ulcer-related diseases that humans get, because they only experience the stress situation, the stress response for a short amount of time, and then you don't get sick. Humans, we have generalized that, our brain has generalized that to other situations which we encounter much more frequently than life-threatening predators. For that reason, we are in a more constant state of stress, and then this leads to these negative health-related impacts. So the key to understanding why humans differ in their responses to stress is to understand that our brains have generalized the stress response, which originally was related only to encountering predators, to life-threatening situations, to many more situations which we encounter frequently. And given that all our brains don't work the same way, there are individual differences in what we experience as being stressful and how the magnitude of stress that we experience in situations. Before I'm going to go further into detail about inter-individual differences on stress, if you ask participants about what they perceive to be stressful or not, then you often see that they mention the same reasons. And I've just created a short list here with 5 causes which are frequently presented as causes of stress. None of these are really life-threatening. Top one is often money. So many people, if you ask them what they worry about, it's financial issues. And that is probably the only one that you could consider a little bit related to a threat of survival. Second, a really common cause that is mentioned as a stressor is work-related stressors. And that's quite a big range, because that could be just being stressed because of the interaction with colleagues at work. It could be being stressed about worrying to lose the job, or about not getting the next promotion, about having to do an oral presentation in front of a big group of CEOs, for instance. So work-related stress factors are really vary. There are many, they have a big range. And number 3 is often health. Health-related concerns is also a major stressor that people frequently mention. Money, work, and health, these 3 are basically on all the top 10 lists of stressors that I know. They are always amongst the top 5 on these lists. And then I added 2 other common stressors. Many individuals feel stressed because of insomnia, of a lack of sleep. And interestingly, also many people get stressed when they have to think about their daily chores. So we have something in common. The things that many of us feel stressed about, we share some of these, but there are also big differences. Think about going to the dentist. I'm pretty sure that you know extreme examples. I'm pretty sure that you know people who really worry about going to the dentist. If they have an appointment in a few days, they really freak out, even just if it's just a regular cleaning procedure. And there are other people who actually don't worry, who are not stressed at all about going to the dentist. If it's a cleaning procedure or even a more invasive surgical procedure, they just don't worry. So there are people who get stressed about going to the dentist, others don't. This is a picture that shows a lecture theater filled with students. And if you become a student, if you go into higher education, then it's very likely that you will experience such a situation where you sit together with many, many, many other students in a big lecture theater. And that can be up to 300, 400, 500 students. And then just what you will notice then is there are some students who, when the lecturer asks a question, they just answer the question. They raise their hand and they speak in front of all the other 300, 400, 500 students. And they don't seem to be stressed about that. So they really don't have a problem with speaking up in public and giving an answer to the lecturer. And then there are many more students who don't dare to speak up because they are really stressed about raising their hand and answering it, giving a wrong answer, what the other people might think about them. So there are huge inter-individual difference how stressful students or pupils at school, it might be the same thing, experience the situation when they have to speak up in front of other people and answer a question presented by the lecturer or the teacher. It's just a third example, and that's about school, but actually the point that I would like to make, if you have young kids or someday you might have kids, then when you go to the nursery, you will observe differences between how the toddlers respond to the fact that they now have to go to the nursery and be there alone, well, without their parents, their family, for a few hours. Some of the toddlers, they really freak out, they really get stressed out just because of the fact that they have to go to the nursery, and others don't have a problem at all with that. So I have a final example, just to illustrate again how huge this variation can be, and how, well, to some extent, sometimes it's really, to some extent, funny or really surprising about what people can feel stressed about. This chunk of dust here, this dust bunny, that's something that you all know from, particularly if you have a wood floor and you didn't use the vacuum cleaner for a few days, then you will have these dust bunnies on the floor. And obviously, probably everyone who's watching this is not going to be stressed out because of dust bunnies. But my son actually is. He's 4 years old, and if he sees a dust bunny lying somewhere on the floor, he freaks out. He really gets stressed, and he's really unable to do something about it or to do something else before we actually remove the dust bunny. So the same situation for most of us, just not stressful at all, and for him that really creates a higher level of stress. So what explains these differences? Well, what's the answer to the question why some of us can really cope well with stress and others can't? Well, I'm going to present you 3 answers. This is not an exhaustive list, so psychological research came up with many more answers, but I'm just giving you 3 ideas why people differ on that. So the first one that I would like to discuss is called appraisals. Appraisals is a technical term to describe any kind of judgment, evaluation, assessment that you make. So if you look out of the window now and you assess the weather, and you will see, well, it's really sunny, it's blue sky, it's a beautiful day. This kind of assessment, it's a beautiful day, it's sunny outside, that is an appraisal. If you look at my shirt and you feel that this is a nice shirt or this is an ugly shirt, again, this judgment, that's an appraisal. So any kind of judgment, evaluation, assessment that you make, the technical term that is used in the psychological literature for it, it's appraisal. So, and this model that I'm going to present you here suggests that the differences between individuals are created by differences in assessing potentially stressful situations. And the model specifies two judgments that determine whether we feel stressed or not. So if there is an event, and that can be a past event, a current event, or something that you just imagine, then according to this model, we first try to classify the event as either being something that is just positive for us, that is irrelevant to us, or something that is potentially stressful because we feel it's a challenge, or it's threatening us, or it's associated with harm or loss. So if you think, for instance, about a public speaking situation in a classroom, in front of an audience, in front of your teachers, some students really enjoy that. For them, it's just a positive situation. They really love to do that. So they assess this event, public speaking, as being positive, and that's why they don't feel stressed. For some other students, they just consider this to be completely irrelevant. In particular, you might have experienced the same thing if it's a non-assessed public speaking situation. If you have to deliver just a practice, a mock presentation, for instance, then you might feel this is completely irrelevant and you will not feel stressed. However, some students will feel that any kind of public speaking situation, they will feel this is challenging, or they feel this is threatening. It threatens my mark. It threatens my standing with the lecturers, with the teachers, or with my peers. And they might feel that there might be some potential harm or loss involved, loss of marks, loss of future perspectives, or psychological harm if you deliver a weak presentation and then other students make fun of you. So for some of us, we feel that this presentation is potentially stressful. And if you do that, then our brain will do a second appraisal, a second assessment, and we will assess whether we have the resources to cope with the event. In the case of a public speaking situation, that would mean whether we feel that we are able to deliver a good talk and to handle questions, to handle negative comments. So if we feel that we have the skills, the resources, the mindset that is required to cope with that potentially stressful event, we should not feel stressed. However, if we feel that we lack the skill, the resources to do well in that particular situation, then we should feel stressed. So what this model here does and suggests that people who assess an event as being a challenge, a threat, or associated with harm or loss, and in addition to that, assess that they don't have the resources, the skills to do well in that situation, to cope with that situation, these people should feel stressed. All the other individuals who feel that this is a really positive event, or this is an irrelevant event, or feel that they have the skills, the resources that they need to cope with the potentially stressful event, they will not experience stress. So that's the first explanation of individual differences. The judgments, the appraisals that individuals make in relation to the potentially stressful situation, they differ, and for that reason, individuals differ whether they feel stressed in a situation or not. Here's a second answer that I like to give you to the question why some of us cope well with stress and others don't. It's about how we actually handle the consequences of stress. So this is now not about actually whether we experience a stress response in the first place. This is now about what we do about it. And some of the strategies that we might be using are more efficient than others. So some of us use strategies that are efficient to deal with the negative consequences of stress, and they feel less stress as a consequence. Others make the wrong choice and pick a strategy that is less appropriate, and they feel more stressed. One way to classify the different ways to handle the negative consequences of stress are emotion-focused coping strategies and into problem-focused coping strategies. Problem-focused coping strategies is everything that tries directly to change somehow the stress-inducing event. If you think about a public speaking situation, problem-focused coping style would be that you try to practice the speech, for instance, or that you try to get a lot of information about what is expected from you to present in that presentation, what the circumstances will be, who will be the people in the audience, how long are you supposed to talk, how will they assess you. So this is a problem-focused coping style because it directly focuses on changing the event or the parameter of the stress-inducing event itself. In contrast to that, an emotion-focused coping style is a style that focuses on just basically handling the emotions, the negative emotions that you experience when you feel stressed about something. And emotion-focused coping styles can be distraction. So if you feel stressed about an upcoming presentation, you could just go out for a walk with your dog. You could go to the gym, do some physical exercise. You could watch TV. So that's distraction. Or you could just meet friends and share the negative emotions that you have about the stressful event. And all these strategies would be called emotion-focused coping strategies. Interestingly, they are sometimes efficient and sometimes not. And one variable that determines whether it's an efficient way to use emotion-focused coping or problem-focused coping is whether the stress-inducing event can be changed, whether you can control it or not. If you can control and change an event, which is probably the case in a presentation that you have to do, then a problem-focused coping style leads to less stress. So if it's something that you can control, that you can change, like an assessment, an exam, an oral presentation, then adopting a problem-focused coping style will lead to reduced feelings of stress in comparison to an emotion-focused coping style. If you use an emotion-focused coping style, then you might feel better in the short term, but not in the long run. In the long run, you will experience more stress. However, it's exactly the opposite if you are dealing with a situation where you can't control the stressful event, where you can't change it. For instance, if you have a terminal illness and there's absolutely no cure for that illness, and you just have a few months to live left, then adopting a problem-focused coping style is not good. It will increase your stress levels, because problem-focused coping style in that case would mean that you try to find a cure, even if there's none. So in these situations where you can't change the event itself, where you can't control it, where you can't do anything about it, it's better to use an emotion-focused coping style. So, well, now some of us are really good in always switching between these two coping styles and always using the most appropriate ones. And these will be the people who experience not huge amounts of stress in their everyday lives. Some of us, we always make the wrong choice, right? So if an event is controllable, we use emotion-focused coping, and for that reason, it's not efficient. We experience stress. If we experience an uncontrollable event, we use problem-focused coping style, wrong choice, we experience a lot of stress. So these individuals amongst us, they will experience huge amounts of stress. And then there are other people, and that's probably the majority of us, who just have a preference, a tendency to either always use emotion-focused coping styles or to always use problem-focused coping styles. And then in some situations, we do well. We experience not a lot of stress because our coping style is well adapted and efficient to the situation that we encounter. But in other situations, it's the wrong choice and we experience stress. So the way how people deal with stress, it's another variable that explains why some of us cope well with stress and others don't. The third answer that I would like to give you to that question is about social support. So it's again a slightly different angle. We had appraisals, we had different coping styles, and this is now about social support. And it's actually quite simple. If we have no social support system, or we don't use the one that we have, we will suffer from stress. We will feel stressed, and we will also experience these long-term negative health-related consequences. However, if we have a social support system in place and we use it, then the social support system buffers us against stress, and we will experience a much attenuated stress response. And how can social support help? Well, basically, social support can help on different levels. So one way, think about if you're worried about financial issues. Social support means that you have friends who would be able to give you some money and to help you with your financial problems. So that's one way how social support might attenuate the stress response. Social support also means that you have friends who just would be there and listen to you. And so they just give you an opportunity for emotion-focused coping with stress. And social support system also allows you to have a more efficient problem-focused coping approach, because it just means that if you have people who have already experienced the same situation, they can give you just advice on how to do well, on how to resolve that issue. So for instance, if you just lost your job and you are really stressed about that, if you have friends, family members who experience the same situation, they might actually have good advice on what to do, how to quickly find a new job. And then that's also how social support will help you to reduce the stress that you experience. So I've presented to you basically 3 different ideas that have been studied in psychological research that explain why some people cope well with stress and others don't. We've talked about that it's all in our brains, that it all depends on the judgments, the evaluations, the appraisals that we make when encountering stressful situations. Some of us, they experience certain situations as being threatening, as being harmful, associated with loss, and they feel that they don't have the skills, the resources to cope with the stress. They will experience stress. Others just feel that they have the resources, the skills to face the stress, or they just feel that the situation is irrelevant or positive. They won't experience any stress. The second answer to the question was, we differ in how we handle the consequences of stress. And some of us are good in using always the appropriate coping style, and for that reason they experience less stress. Others use the wrong style, at least from time to time, and then we experience a lot of stress. And the third answer is social support system. If you have a social support system and you use it, then it can help you to experience much less stress. Individuals who don't have a social support system or who don't use it, they will experience huge amounts of stress. This was the short introduction, brief introduction to ideas about stress, to inter-individual differences on stress. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was really, really informative and so interesting to see all of those different strands. If you are watching at home, you now have an opportunity to ask us a question using the Q&A or via email at outreach@ljmu.ac.uk. If you're planning on attending a few more of these lightning lunch sessions, then you will be pleased to know that there are 2 more psychology sessions coming up over the next couple of weeks. You should look out for those on the main virtual outreach website, or if you are watching in the future on demand, then there will be potentially some already pre-populated recordings on there that you can watch. From both of us here today, as we have not had any questions, I will let you have a lovely afternoon, and we hope to see you again very soon. Thank you again, Michael. That was very good.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.